Chasing Purpose, written by Devron Lee. Introduction. It is said that a person cannot achieve two or more goals simultaneously, but this individual does his best to prove that theory false. Domino Johnson demonstrates various qualities and goes through events of a man trying to make amends for his past decisions. An intelligent student and respected fairly by other people, Domino didn't have much. He did his best to earn his money honestly, even though that didn't pay off in the long run to be successful. He eventually opened an empire business that generates billions of dollars each year. His mother worked hard to provide food, clothes, and shelter for him and his older siblings. Domino's life revolved around his family, friends, school, and everything else life threw at him. His father, John Johnson, was successful at learning trades and the owner of a few trading companies. John is selfish to an extreme extent because he wants to be in control of everything he is invested in. Domino is an example of an opportunist businessman. Part of who Domino is to help others achieve their goals. When an opportunity arises, he is quick to jump on it. However, he is constantly challenged by personal obstacles and unknown adversaries. Domino's reaction tragically puts the icing on the cake of this journey. His tragic flaw is the inability to control oneself in the heat of the moment, causing himself overwhelming loss in ways no one could possibly comprehend. And the outcomes are devastating. Chapter 1. I saw all the works that were done under the sun, and looked everything was futile, a chasing after the wind. King Solomon. Domino wondered the other day while reading the Bible, trying to figure out if it's worth the time to keep striving to do his best work every day, bettering himself, and helping others along the way. This was a thought that plagued him because at times it did not pay off in the way that he had hoped. But luckily, it never stopped him from doing what he felt was right in his heart. Dom's phone rang, and it was his best friend, James Williams. Dom loved him like he's his own brother. Good morning, Dom. What do you have planned for today? James asked. Honestly, I just have to go see about this money that one of my customers owes me. Do you want to go with me to pick it up? Dom replied. I'm going to hurry up and get showered and get dressed. Then I'll be on my way over to pick you up after I drop my girlfriend off at work, James said. Understood. I'll do the same. Hopefully everything goes as planned so we can handle business, Dom replied. Dom hopped in the shower. He took his time as he knew it would take James a minute to get there. While standing in the shower, Dom placed his hand on the wall to steady himself. He went into a deep thought. God, let this transaction go smooth. I don't want to have to get physical with anyone today. After Dom finished his silent little prayer, or what he would call one, he washed himself up and hopped out of the shower to finally get dressed. He threw on some dark denim Levi's and a black Nike t-shirt, nothing too fancy. He wanted to look casual, so if something went down, he wouldn't have to get his nicer clothes dirty. Dom was a pretty handsome guy. He could pull off anything he put on anyway. With his low-cut fade and chocolate complexion, he always turned heads. He had a strong jawline that accentuated when he smiled his pearly whites. No woman could resist, especially if they looked into his hazel eyes. James hopped in the shower after hanging up with Dom and did the opposite. He was trying to be in and out and hoped that Jasmine would be ready to go once he was done getting cleaned up. James was the guy everyone assumed to be the hardest out of him and Domino. It had been a few years now that James decided to grow his hair out and lock it up. It was a low-maintenance style, and it was the way he enjoyed it because he wasn't into taking hours to getting ready. He would get them lined up and retwisted every so often. Though not really blood brothers, Domino and James were always mistaken for such because they looked similar with their chocolate complexions. James had a slightly bigger build than Domino and would always be there to protect him if he needed it. He knew Dom could handle himself, but that didn't stop his enjoyment of intimidating folks into not trying Dom when they had to handle business. As James was putting on the rest of his clothes, James' girlfriend gets a call from her coworker. Hey, Jasmine, what time do you think you'll be at work? Jessica asked. As soon as James gets out of the shower and dressed, I'll be on my way there, Jasmine said. Don't forget to ask him if you can go out tonight to the club. This man will question me about why I want to go out to the club, Jasmine responded in an irritated voice. Well, you never know if you don't ask him. I'm going to ask him and see what happens, Jasmine says depressingly as she hangs up the phone. James opened the door to the bedroom to come out. He had heard Jasmine's conversation and figured he would let Jasmine go out tonight. He hated that his girl was afraid to ask him if he would mind if she went out. He trusted her completely. It was these dudes out here that had no respect, and he didn't want to imagine Jasmine in a situation that she could not get out of, especially if he wasn't able to be there to protect her. Jasmine calls out to James from the living room and asks him, "Would you mind if I go out tonight with my friend Jessica at the club?" Without hesitation, James says, "No, I wouldn't mind. I'll be out myself tonight with Dom." "Okay. Well, then hurry up. My shift at work starts soon." James grabs everything that he will need so he doesn't have to come back to the house. Jasmine and James leave out the door, and James makes sure to lock the top and bottom lock. The neighborhood they live in is a good one, but James is always cautious of his surroundings. They get into their 2013 red Chevy Impala and make their way to Jasmine's job. It's a 15-minute drive, so James and Jasmine make small talk. Jasmine asks what he had planned for the day, and James let Jasmine know that he wants her to be safe tonight at the club. When James pulls up to drop Jasmine off, he leans over and kisses her goodbye. Jasmine smiles so big. She loved her man so much, and he always made sure she knew he loved her too. Once Jasmine is fully out of the car, James heads over to pick up Dom. From Jasmine's job, it's another 15 minutes towards Dom. While Dom was waiting for James to pick him up, Dom called his secretary and told her to make sure everything was ready to go for the presentation today when he got to the office. Dom didn't want anything to go wrong. He had been working so hard on building these relationships with these companies, and anything less than perfect was not good enough to seal the deal they had in place with them. He did not need anything getting in the way of his success. The presentation would explain how and why partnerships with 12 different companies, Uptake, Vox Media, Audacity, DraftKings, Net Worth, Lulu, Blue Apron, Instacart, Journal Co., EWH, Zenefits, and Apricot will generate a lot more money and publicity. They will be able to give back to the community and carefully pursue various projects. The projects will consist of building homes for people struggling, people with different incomes, different schools, insurance companies, and multiple hospitals. Most importantly, this will give anyone in the community and outside of it the opportunities and resources to choose their own path in setting their goals and reaching them. Dom knew it wouldn't be easy to convince others about the positivity that would come from this. See, these companies didn't like to lose money, even if for the people's greater good. He had to make it worth it for them as well. For his plan to be successful, James and Dom had to make an errand to pick up some money from their customers. James eventually arrived at Dom's house. He honked for Dom a few times before he actually made it out of the house. Dom came outside, got in the car, and they pulled off in a hurry. They head uptown towards some of the more violent areas in the city. These areas are mostly inhabited by gang members, with the exception of senior citizens and families trying to make an honest living. Their presentation would help with those families who wanted to get out of those areas such as this. That is why it was so important to Dom. Through the car window, he watched these families that struggle and do what they had to do to make sure their families had the basics to survive, all while they had to endure these unhealthy and violent environments. He definitely wanted to make a change and impact their lives. While in the car enjoying the ride and blasting their music, a cop car turned a siren on behind them. James became aggravated as he saw the bright blue and red lights flash. He didn't feel like being held up. He slowed down the vehicle to a stop so that they could hurry and deal with the police. The officers walked up on both sides of the tinted car windows and asked them, "Where are you going?" "To a family function," James replied smartly. The officers asked for his driver's license and registration to check the information and make sure everything is up to date and that he has no ticket violations. The officer does a double take and asks James and Dom, "Do I know you from somewhere, James? You look familiar." "No, sir," James responded, though he did know him from back in the day. "Everything appears to be accurate. Make sure you both get to your destination safely," the officer says. The officers got back in their car and drove away to finish patrolling their assigned territory. Dom and James drove off a little while after the police officers left. They started to laugh because they were unrecognizable to the cops. Back in the day, Dom's hair was more grown out in a fro-type fashion along with his facial hair. James, on the other hand, had shorter hair and barely any facial hair to make his distinguishable. They finally reached the customer and received 3 briefcases. The customer showed them what was in the briefcases so that Dom and James were sure of what they were receiving, and then he put the briefcases in the trunk of James' car. They drove off in a hurry in the direction of the office because they are pressed for time. James and Dom did their best to make it to meeting on time to explain their presentation to 12 other companies that are attending. Finally, making it into the meeting on time to present the presentation, they were a little out of breath. Both Dom and James had to change once they got to their offices. They wanted to give a great impression. They had been working with these companies, but they had made an effort to always look their best in their presence to show their professionalism and seriousness about what they do. With confidence, Dom explained everything to the owners of the companies. Some were not so sure things would work out how he explained it would. So for insurance purposes, he placed 3 briefcases on the table and showed them $12 billion. He wanted them to know that they were not the only ones taking a risk here. Dom explained that each company will receive $1 billion. With this money, they will make a profit that will help with other upcoming projects. They all signed and agreed to the partnership with Dom as the chairman. James is the second chairman to make sure that things are always copacetic in the business. Furthermore, all the companies will meet every month to check their progress and status reports. All the companies felt more at ease with how things would be transpiring throughout the process. After the deal was closed, Dom and James returned to the business day-to-day operations. They had to make sure they assigned a person to each company's project so they could get a bi-weekly report on the progression. And then James wanted to visit each location and make sure that each employee knew that if there was any trouble, that things would not end well for them. James was a sucker for intimidating people. He never passed on the chance to instill fear in someone. James also had a big heart, but the street in him also loved the thuggish vibe people got from him and feared. James knew that Dom had worked so hard and he wanted things to go as smooth as possible to see it done right. Dom took it upon himself to personally visit each company and get their independent ideas for each project. He wanted to make sure each company was happy with the results. Happy client equaled more money in his pockets, but this also meant more that he could give back to the people. That was the bigger picture. Chapter 2. Later that night, Jasmine and Jessica went out to the club to have drinks and enjoy themselves. They could hear the music blaring as they stood in line. It was a little chilly outside, but they were close to the front of the line, so they just put the cold out of their minds. Once they reached the door, they had no problem getting in, as it was ladies' night. They made their way to the door before it hit 10:30 p.m., just in time. The club was alive. Their eyes had to adjust to the darkness with all the multicolored flashing lights on the dance floor. It was very crowded tonight, and people were dancing exotically on the floor with each other. As Jasmine made her way to the bar, dancing, sweaty bodies pressed up and rubbed up against her. She didn't too much mind it, though. It was the fastest way across the room. She felt men's eyes on her as she passed, and because she didn't go out as much as she used to, she would feel out of place at times. After returning from the bar, Jasmine, Jessica, and their friends were getting intoxicated to the point where they started dancing, grinding, and groping on some of the guys at the club, moving their bottom to the rhythm of the music. In a matter of minutes, they were all sweating, but it felt so good to be out and enjoying their night with no worries, releasing the day's stress. Jessica was the most intoxicated out of all of Jasmine's friends. She was exposing her breasts and kissing multiple guys on the floor. Seeing this, Jasmine knew it was time for them to go. She was determined to get Jessica out of the club by any means necessary. Jasmine knew something bad could happen to Jessica if they did not leave the club. She knew this because of bad experiences in the past when she used to dance and drink with guys who she didn't know well. She would not be able to live with herself if she didn't do what she thought would be best for her friend. Reluctantly, Jasmine could not force Jessica to leave with her. Jessica wanted to stay with the guys and have more drinks and continue to dance. Their friends that they met at the club had all gone home already because they had to get up early for work. So Jasmine was the only one left with Jessica. She kept trying until she couldn't no more. Jessica was indeed a grown woman, and at this point, she was allowed to do as she pleased. Jasmine drew Jessica close to her. "What's up, girl? You look worried," Jessica said, slurring her words. "Please be careful with these men." I don't want to leave you, but you don't want to leave and you're grown. Just please be as careful as you can. Jasmine left after telling her friend that. She had a bad feeling in her gut, but she knew Jessica was too far gone and was going to be stubborn about leaving, and she kept trying to get her out of there. So she did all she could do, and she went home because she was very tired. Even though her attempts to bring Jessica out of the club failed, she tried to call her, but Jasmine was too tired and fell asleep. One of the guys Jessica was dancing with went to buy her another drink from the bar. While he was at the bar, he roofied her drink discreetly. After he paid, he went right back to the dance floor and handed Jessica the drink. The guys from the club had gotten her so drunk that her head started spinning and she began throwing up. They offered to take her home because she was in no condition to drive herself. The guys deceived her and took her to one of their houses and they raped her repeatedly. Jessica tried to make them stop, but she was too drunk to fight back. They took turns penetrating her, thrusting inside of her, rougher than the one before. After they were finally satisfied, Jessica got up slowly, going in and out of consciousness while bleeding out of her vagina. She fixed her clothes, grabbed her belongings, and left the house. Jessica flagged down a taxi in order to get a ride home. She was still crying by the time she arrived to the house. The taxi driver felt sympathy for her as he watched her bawl her eyes out the entire ride, offering as much help as possible. She fell face first after getting out of the taxi, which is the reason behind some of her battle wounds. Jessica felt extremely embarrassed. It was the worst feeling in the world. Once getting inside of her home, Jessica passed out. The next morning, Jasmine got a call from Jessica crying obsessively on the phone. When Jessica woke up, the day before was just as much as a blur, as she couldn't remember even little things like what she had for dinner. Her initial thought was that she got too drunk and either got into a fight or fell down, which would explain the bruises and cuts. Jessica's body had never felt like this before. She was still dizzy, had blurred vision, felt loopy, and was generally confused about everything that had gone on. This feeling was different than a hangover. It was 10 times worse. She knew something was wrong, and she needed something to jog her memory to figure out what it was. When Jessica finally made her way to the bathroom, stumbling, it all came back to her. Her vagina was in excruciating pain, and vision of the night before hit her so hard and so fast. She immediately broke down. She remembered the men and the abuse she had endured. That's when she called Jasmine. Jasmine froze and went into intense shock. She felt helpless as tears streamed down her face. Her heart continued to beat fast as she took deep breaths to try to and remain calm. She grabbed her things and rushed over to Jessica's house to comfort her. I'm calling the cops so these guys can get arrested for raping you, Jasmine said. I just want this to go away and move on from it. Please don't call the cops. This will go on forever and people will know I was raped. Others will try to exploit or take advantage of me because I couldn't stop them from raping me. Jessica replied, I understand. I won't call them. Either you stay with me or I'll be staying with you for a while. Jasmine let her know sternly. I'll stay at my house, but thank you for being here for me, Jessica said, crying even harder than she was before. You're like my sister. I'll always be there for you. Jasmine hugged Jessica while she cried. Jasmine had always been there for Jessica, even when they were younger. Though Jessica was older by a year, Jasmine always felt like an older sister. She has had this protectiveness of Jessica for the longest. Jessica always seemed more susceptible to the influences around them and always found a way to be in some kind of trouble. It didn't help that men always flocked to her either. So they were always trying to take advantage of her in one way or another. Jasmine had her share of incidents, but with Jasmine, she wanted to see that it didn't happen to her either. Being there for Jessica right now was something that would make both of them feel good. Jessica was needy, but not in the annoying way. She did love attention, and having Jasmine there with her, she knew in the back of her head it made her feel a bit safer. Jessica thought of herself as a free bird, and sometimes people would try to cage her. She was always everywhere and went with the flow of things. You could say Jasmine kept her grounded. She came to her for advice, not that she always took it, but it was valuable to her and always considered when she made decisions. She wanted to make Jasmine proud of her, but she always found herself needing more help than Jasmine. It made her feel some kind of way, but it just happened to be their dynamic. Jasmine needed to feel needed. So it worked throughout their years of friendship. They have created a strong bond, and no one had ever been able to come in between them. They complemented each other. Chapter 3. Zenefits had experienced setbacks with their projects. The board members and shareholders of this company had been debating on whether they liked their agreement that their CEO and chairwoman signed over to Dom and James' company. The chairwoman of this company is a lady named Benita, who deals with health care, insurance, medical and personal records, and pharmacies around the world. She's been doing business with small companies that help her complete tasks efficiently, with a quick turnaround. Since the last time she needed their help, the companies have grown larger than before and are known for their ruthless tactics. Bonita went to seek their help, but when she saw that some of their companies had signed an agreement with Dom's company, she questioned if she should still ask for their assistance or not. Furthermore, some of the board members are debating on if they should remove Benita as CEO and vote for a new CEO and chairwoman, who are more willing to comply with everything they demand. The board members came to an agreement to allow Benita 2 months to get back in their favor. Benita was red in the face and very angry because she started this business by herself. She put in a lot of hard work and time over the years to make the company what it is today. She felt indignant about the board members' lack of confidence in her decision making. She was not about to let someone else come in and change the way she had been doing things. She decided to call her assistant to her office and told her to send out an anonymous $500,000 contract to all the board members that did not want her as CEO and chairwoman. The assistant diligently interviewed each board member to determine which ones are not for keeping Benita in charge of the business. Later that night, the assistant typed up a contract and sent it out to the assassins' websites. For the last 6 weeks, over 9 board members and family members have been found murdered execution style on the news. The rest of the board members called out for an immediate vote to either appoint a new CEO or keep Benita as CEO. The final vote was in favor of keeping Benita as CEO and chairwoman over the company. Meanwhile, some of the hospitals and public record companies owned by Benita were being investigated due to missing personal and medical records that belonged to employees and important clients. More than 75% of Benita's clients hired private investigators to help investigate how their information went missing. These clients trusted Benita because they had been doing business with her for a very long time. But because they don't trust all of her business partners and employees, the clients had been keeping close tabs on all corrupted rumors that had been circling around. Some of the rumors started to slowly come to light. Benita gave the private investigators authorization to conduct their investigation with Benita's security team. Dom decided that he would call Benita personally since they have a close relationship. For some years now, they've been secretly seeing each other. No one knew except for Benita's assistant. When he called Benita, he asked her if she had been experiencing any problems. Yes, some of my employees and clients' personal records have gone missing in my company under investigation. Why do you ask? She questioned. All the other companies have had lots of major problems after signing the agreement with me, such as their building catching on fire, buildings being robbed during work hours, important files missing from the company, and a couple of other companies' employees have been killed in the process of everything that's been happening. This has all been slowing down business, Dom said. I think it could possibly be an inside job, Benita said. Dom, knowing Benita for such a long time, felt in his gut that she may be responsible for some part of this. He was deeply in love with her. And with that, he knew she was capable if she felt threatened. He had heard the rumors of her possibly being replaced by CEO and chairwoman of her own company. That had to have hit her in a hard way or made her feel some type of way. Nonetheless, business was business, and Benita understood this well. Hence the reason they were good together. He didn't want to make assumptions, but this is what prompted him to mention the situation to her. He just hoped that she was telling the truth. So he continued on in his theories. There might be a strong possibility that someone or a group of individuals are causing these problems, not just in one company, but in all of them. This puts everyone's project in jeopardy. Yes, I totally agree with you. We both know people will find someone else to blame for the problems going on within our companies. I feel responsible for what is going on, even though I'm not the one who started it. I want to help the families of those employees by paying for their funerals. Benita reminds him, some things are beyond our control and we have to learn to accept that. With Benita's jump to just forget about this and move on, it perked up his ears, and the feeling in Dom's gut came back. He prayed that she had nothing to do with the situation. Yes, you're right, but it's always been hard for me to accept that. Dom still sent the letters to the deceased employees' families with a check to help pay for the funeral expenses. He continued to ponder why these things were happening so subtly out of nowhere. Dom had unexpected guests come out of the blue to offer to resolve the problems that Dom and his business partners had been experiencing. Unfortunately, the person it happened to be was Dom's dad. His father, John, has many different business trade companies and tons of street knowledge. This would be an amazing blessing if only they didn't have such a bad relationship. To Dom, his dad was basically a sperm donor. His dad had not been there for 21 years of his life. And then when he chose to come back, it was sparingly, and he would see him here and there. Dom was older now, so of course he harbored less hate and more of a nonchalant attitude about his father, about if his father was going to be consistent or not. His father had proven to not so much blink as twice about walking out months after he was born because drugs were more important than a wife and a son. However, something so ugly could have been more important than family. Dom didn't understand. How could something so ugly could have been more important than family? Dom didn't understand. He himself had been a part of the streets and he knows how it can be. But if he had half the woman his mother in his corner, he would have given up the streets for good. The many nights Dom heard his mother crying because she was alone. He hated his dad for so long. He didn't understand how his father could not be affected by the fact that he was never there for milestones in his life, sports, academic achievements, and life moments that a parent couldn't get back. At some point, Dom needed a man to teach him how to be a man. All he had was the streets. And before turning his life around, he hated that some part of him did what his father did. His father was supposed to be there and show him how to be a man and how a man should love a woman, but instead, Dom became a product of his environment until he knew better. And when you know better, you do better. He wanted to be there and help support his mom. And so he did the only way he learned how. And he made it hard for Dom to let anyone in because his own father had left him. If his own father could walk out and want zero contact with him, then why would anyone else want to invest time in Dom? So, with all of the inconsistency of his father and his support, Dom is trying to figure out whether his father is sincerely offering assistance or if he has a hidden agenda. As usual, even the times he was there in his life, he was always trying to gain something of Dom's or find a way to profit from him, whether that be from stealing from him or exploiting him. Dom called an emergency meeting for all the heads to vote whether or not to accept assistance from John. John waited in Dom's office to hear the decision. In his head, he had already predicted that they would take his help. So when the decisions came back, he just smirked. The majority of the vote was in favor of accepting his help. John started by gathering information about what has happened the last few months. Next, he decided what would be the best course of action. Bringing his employees into the companies as extra security was the first move. Secretly, John's employees met up with his other double agents inside of these companies that were in partnership with Dom and told them slowly how to stop the chaos. After several months go by, things are getting better from the companies, and John has been busy buying stocks from some of the companies as well. This is allowing him to gain more power and authority over decisions being made in the companies where he had begun to buy stock. Dom had a feeling that something wasn't right with everything that had been going on. In his gut, he hated that his father was allowed to help with his company. He knew it was only fair to involve the board vote, but he never felt right about none of it. He was still trying to figure out the real reason for why his father was there. Dom called James while driving to go pick up something to eat. Dom tells James, "I feel like something is out of place. Some of the ways things have happened are just not sitting right with me. And you know how I don't trust my father anyways." "I feel you. Yeah, things seem to go down too quickly. Like all he had to do was say the word. I'll do some discreet investigating and report back to you what I find out. Tread carefully. There are many eyes and ears around us with their deceitful tactics," Dom said, pulling into the drive-thru of JJ's. He loved him some catfish. It reminded him of home. His mother had passed away a few years back, and he missed her dearly. This was another reason he was torn between his dislike for his father and only having one parent left on earth. Though he would have preferred his mother if his mother was the one that had lived. She got breast cancer, and they caught it too late. She was such a hardworking woman. She had no time to worry about herself. She had no signs until she had already had it for about 5 months. It traveled fast and grew at an alarming rate. And when they tried some of the radiation therapy, After that, she only had a month left to live. Dom's dad didn't come visit his mother once. He truly did not understand why he didn't. It made him so angry towards him. But he also wanted to understand his father's thought process and why he did everything. It was something that he never got. So, with that reality, Dom is always on his toes when it comes to his father. After receiving his food, he goes home to eat and decides to get some rest, but not before calling Benita over to help him sleep. With their relationship and working in business together, they didn't want anyone to think they would mix business and pleasure and not be accountable for some of the companies they partnered with. Chapter 4. James called Jasmine to see how everything was going with her. Jasmine finally tells James what happened to Jessica the night that they went out to the club. James' anger flares up because he thinks back to what happened to Jasmine in the past. That's how him and Jasmine met. One night a few years ago, Jasmine had done some partying and she was walking home. As she was on the block away from her place, a man pulled up to her. Hey, sweet thing, where you headed? Home. Have a good night. Jasmine continued her walking home, but the man didn't leave her alone. Do you need a ride home? I hate to see something happen to a sweet thing like yourself. No, I'm fine, thank you. Jasmine was trying to be as polite as possible because she was no stranger to men getting upset if you were rude and turning them down. You're stumbling a little bit. Let me just help you. How far you got to walk? I'm good, sir. Please leave me alone. He would not leave Jasmine alone and kept following her, and she felt more and more scared. Jasmine ran and found herself at a dead end in an alley. She didn't want to head to her place because she didn't want him to know where she lived. Unfortunately, the man got a hold of her. He was pretty wasted, and the drugs the man gave her didn't make it any better. She was going in and out of consciousness and tried to just forget or black out. A few hours later, the police called and ended up finding her in the alley. They thought that she may have been a prostitute and arrested her. Jasmine tried to explain what happened, but the police didn't believe her. They drove her down to the station and filed a report. In the waiting room sat James. He was cuffed and in a pretty bad condition. He looked like he got beat up bad. Jasmine stared at him. What you looking at, girl? Nothing, she said, not realizing she was staring. What you in here for? They think I'm a prostitute. And you're not? James questioned, eyeing her outfit and condition. No, I got raped, and these assholes don't believe me. They found me in an alley just a little bit ago. I was running from this guy who was following me home. I was pretty drunk and thought the walk would sober me. He drugged me even more and got a hold of me. I wish I didn't remember what happened after that. This secretary owes me a favor. Hold on real quick. James sat up and called the secretary over to him. James got Jasmine into the back and tested with a rape kit so she could be released. After Jasmine was released, because they had her in there for hours, James was waiting for her to be released outside. My name is James, he said, holding out his hand, leaning on the sliding door exit. Jasmine turned around and grabbed his hand. Nice to meet you, and thank you so much for what you did for me. No problem. No one should be treated the way that you were. Jasmine put her head down for a moment and then looked up at him with tears in her eyes, slightly nodding her head up and down. After several weeks of getting to know one another, they started dating. James understood that it could have easily been Jasmine again. He could have went off on them for not being more careful, but he knew Jasmine after her incident, and that would be no way she didn't try to get Jessica out of there in a good time. Surprisingly, he doesn't start an argument with her, though. Instead, he's sympathetic for Jasmine and Jessica and let them know he'll try his best to find the men who did it. He wanted to make these girls feel better and decided he was going to make his way to Jasmine to help her comfort her and Jessica. He was going to surprise them with movies and sweet snacks so they could have a good night forgetting about the trauma. What happened instead as he was leaving, James accidentally overheard what has really been going on with the companies from John's employees as he was hanging out with Jasmine. James headed towards the garage floor level, taking the stairs in haste, but does his best to make it seem normal, like nothing was wrong. Unknowingly, James gets blindsided as he is walking to the car to the garage. John comes up right behind him with a gun and hits James in the back of the head and knocks him out cold. John has his employees tie James up, throw him in one of their vans, and send him off to one of their warehouses until given further instructions. John ordered his men to make sure there's no evidence left about anything that happened in the garage. Luckily for John, there were no cameras. James found out that John had been behind everything bad that was happening this entire time. John wanted to come in and play the hero. That's why it was so easy for him to go in and have the companies repair themselves so quickly. John went into the warehouse where his men had taken James to interrogate them. John doesn't immediately interrogate him when he arrives at the warehouse, but he lets his men rough him up to let James know he means business. James began to laugh as he coughed up a mouthful of blood after being beaten. This made James angry, so he ordered his men to strap James to a table so he can torture him properly. James tried to fight them off, but the number of men were too overwhelming. They finally got James on the table and tied him down. John splashed some cold ice water on his face to wake him up. One of John's men held a towel over James' mouth, while John slowly poured water on the towel, making him choke on the water. He finally stopped pouring the water onto James and removed the towel from his face. John had a sinister grin as he says to James, "I know you're not going to tell me what I need to know about my son Dom and what he has planned, but believe me, I'll find out soon enough. And when we get him, we will get him with your help." John walks away with James' phone, an evil grin on his face as he powers it off. Jasmine was calling James for the last several hours since they hung up last. This made Jasmine very upset, so she cursed loud enough that she could have awakened the dead. It wasn't normal for James not to pick up her phone calls. If it had been her not answering the phone, he would have been hysterical and so worried about her. A couple hours later, she decided to text and call Dom, asking if he had ever seen or heard from James. She was very upset because he had not come yet. After leaving Jessica's house very late, she found James not home, and this didn't worry her too much at first until 3 a.m. rolled around and still nothing from him. If he was out late, he was usually with Dom. Dom's phone began to light up. He had been extremely exhausted from everything that had been going on in the last several months, so he decided to put his phone on silent. Unless he was looking at it, he would not know he was being called. So as he lay in his bed, the phone continued to go to voicemail until morning. Jasmine started to get even more anxious and upset because now Dom is not responding. Jasmine got in her car and made her way back to Jessica's home because she did not want to be alone without knowing what was up with James. She had a bad feeling in her gut about this. When she arrived, she informed Jessica about not being able to reach either of the guys. Now Jessica is very paranoid because she is already emotionally and physically traumatized from what happened to her at the club. Jasmine and Jessica start to believe that something is out of place. Neither Dom nor James are picking up their phones at what seemed to be a troubling moment. In Jasmine's gut, she knew something was bad. She knew something bad was coming, and she felt like the boys needed to be on edge. But right now, they were seemingly acting like everything was good. Jessica paced back and forth like a predator, waiting for its prey to move in position. Jasmine grabbed a bottle of wine for Jessica and herself, hoping to calm their nerves down while they wait for James or Dom to respond back. They listen to some of the soothing music in the house as they talk about Jessica's situation. Meanwhile, John and his men kept James locked up in their warehouse. They went back to work as if everything was normal. Both James' hands and feet were still tied up tightly. The pressure started to get to James. He peed on himself several times because he was denied the right to use the bathroom. His mental strength is becoming weaker from being beaten unconscious repeatedly. The men splashed water on his face so he could become conscious again, only to see some of John's men feeding themselves and their guard dogs food in the warehouse. The men finally let him rest for the night. James is mentally and physically drained. He drops to the ground, talking to himself in a whisper. Dom will find me, rescue me, and kill all of them. But I'll kill his father myself. He drifts off into a deep sleep as he sees some of the men start to put on masks. The next morning, Dom wakes up, takes a shower, and gets dressed. He looks at the messages, hoping that James has found some information. After he read the messages, his mind started racing and knew something was up. James must have found out some information at the wrong time. Dom calls Jasmine, and they talk about everything that happened yesterday. Dom called James' phone while he drove to the office to see if anyone had seen him since yesterday. When he gets out of his office, he finds an uninvited guest there. Hi, Dom. Why are you in such a rush? Is it okay if I use your office sometimes? Asked John. Yeah, just don't Look in or touch my laptop, Dom says in an irritated voice. I will not. I have my own laptop. Thanks for being a good sport, John replied with an evil grin on his face. Dom leaves to ask some of the staff if they have seen James. The responses Dom received got him angry because none of them thought that anything was wrong with James not being here. The employees and customers saw Dom's facial expression, and they left his sight. Dom made a phone call to a friend. He calls him his brother in a private room. They talk for about 4 hours straight. The news got around the organization that James had been missing since he left yesterday. Everyone started to gossip about it while they were at work and having lunch. Dom finally left the office and got in his car. He texted Jasmine to let her know not to worry and everything will be all right. Afterward, Dom received a call telling him that some of the employees found out that James is being held captive at a warehouse. Dom speeds over to the location of the warehouse. Something just doesn't seem right to him. Dom slams his car door shut. When he gets to the warehouse, after looking around a bit, Dom spots James, and he is badly beat up. There are masked men that have guns and dogs guarding him. This makes Dom furious, but he keeps a calm, cool, and collected expression on his face. The men start to talk to Dom, demanding a ransom in exchange for James' freedom. Dom thinks on his feet. He calls the number and acts like he's making a wire transaction to this man. They gave Dom the account information as well. Once everything seems squared away, Dom tells the person on the phone 5 minutes. Dom walks over and unties James. The men observe his movements thoroughly. They order Dom and James to walk side by side and exit the warehouse over by the river while pointing guns at them. One of the men made a phone call to John, letting him know everything went as planned. Dom's phone rang, but before he could answer, the men began firing at him because they received a phone call a minute before letting them know the money transfer was reversed. They began chasing after him while shooting round after round. Dom and James made a run for it, but weren't able to make it out without any battle wounds. Dom is gushing blood from his shoulder, and James is limping because he got shot in his knee. But that didn't stop them from making it out alive. Meanwhile, their partner is on the phone with their boss, telling him everything that's transpiring. Their boss chuckles as he listens to what's being told to him. Domino and James are still running, even though they were shot and bleeding heavily at this point. The men continue to chase them until Dom and James lost consciousness and fell in the water. One of the men began throwing grenades in the water where Dom and James had fell at. And suddenly, the grenades went off and blood spread in the water. The men walked back towards the warehouse with that. Dom's car and phone exploded, one after another. John heard a funny noise in his pocket. He takes out James' phone and saw that there's a countdown along with the vibration, even though he remembers powering it off. John threw the phone out of Dom's office window where it exploded in midair, breaking all of the windows and damaging some offices close by. A few people in the area at the time of the explosion were injured as well. John hardly escapes unharmed and got cut by the glass that flew towards him. Chapter 5. The FBI and police department arrived to do a full investigation to try and figure out what was going on. John planned on taking control over Dom's position until the investigation is over. Bonita did not like the idea of having John in control and having to answer to him. She knew something wasn't right about John, but couldn't put her finger on it. She called Dom's phone and went straight to voicemail. Bonita was very worried about Dom since he had not answered his phone. She needed to clear her head, so she left for a drive and left instructions for her secretary to see what she can find about the police or anything else going on. She needed to get to the bottom of this. She felt very strongly for Dom, and if anything happened to him, she didn't know what she would do. The FBI had special interest in Dom's company. All of the companies are under investigation. They're asking for Dom's whereabouts. No one has heard from him or seen him since the other day. John exercises his authority towards all of the other companies. He wants the companies to know that he can take lead if need be, and that he would do a good job as well. He is not yet fully convinced that Dom and James are dead from the gunshot wounds and the explosions from the river. Even though there was a lot of blood, John thought it could have been someone else's. Though Dom and John are not very close, he felt like he would know if his son were really gone. He didn't feel that way at all. Dom and James woke up in the house with their brother Andrew. They are still very sore and recovering from their wounds. Andrew told them about everything he saw in the news and what's been going on. They had announced that Dom was dead but did not know where his body was. Everyone had questions on what would happen to his business in his absence. Then they mentioned how John had stepped up to make sure everything was straight. This infuriated Dom as he sat and watched the nonsense going on the TV screen. He couldn't believe it. James' aunt called Jasmine and let her know everything is all right and he will see her soon. Jasmine has so many questions, but James said he would explain everything the next time they saw each other. Jasmine agreed and decided that she would be okay until then. She loves James and would hate to keep living without him, so she wanted to know what was going on. Dom, on the other hand, had made a call to Voila, who was like an older brother to him. He told him to bring the equipment so they could take back the company. Dom wasn't going out like this. He needed to find a way to infiltrate his own business without being visible. He wanted to make sure he could move in silence. Dom called Bonita from an unknown number to tell her what happened. He explained to her the kidnapping, the explosion, and how they made it out alive. While Dom is on the phone, James told Andrew and Voila everything, but he left out the part of John being the mastermind behind it all. James didn't want to disclose that Dom's father was the one behind all of this because he didn't know how Dom would react right now. His head was all over the place trying to get shit together to come up with a plan. James wanted Dom to be more focused on getting the company back as quietly as he could. Dom, Bonita, and his brothers start to plan how they should go about getting the company back without killing. In their mind, they have a feeling that things will not go as planned. James is pushing for the violence so they can just get things over with and done with. Dom reminds him that they have to be smart about their course of action, being that they are presumed dead. Bonita is now relieved that she knows Dom is still alive and will be back in charge once again. She talks to Dom about keeping him updated on everything that goes on, and the FBI is looking for him. They should keep a low profile until the time is right. Violent thoughts are going through Dom's head, even though he doesn't want to take anyone's life. But in the back of the mind, he knew. In these circumstances, he may have to kill or be killed. Once they did their planning, Dom and Bonita left out for the night to reconnect after the worry. Dom had fixed a nice dinner for the two to apologize for having worrying her so much, and Bonita was dessert. They had filet mignon on a bed of garlic, mashed potatoes, and some vegetables and wine. Bonita loved it when she got treated like a queen. It had been a while since they had a nice dinner because so much had been going on with the business, and they were keeping that the main priority. They had some big plans, and they needed everything to fall into place. But with this sudden trauma, it had been getting hectic and stressful trying to hold it all together. After they finished their meals, Dom led Bonita to the bedroom. He had roses on the bed and another bottle of wine beside the table. He turned Bonita around and unzipped her dress. She shimmied out of it once it fell to her hips. She turned back around and blushed a little. Dom was the only one who could make her pretty. You're beautiful, you know that, right? Oh, Dom, was all Bonita could say before attacking his mouth with hers. They spent the night making love and looking forward to the next day. Several weeks later, Dom had a conversation with Bonita about the status of their plans. The companies that partnered with Dom's company were wondering if he would ever come back. The business partners called an emergency meeting addressing if they should discontinue their partnership with Dom's company due to his disappearance. Dom urges Bonita to do whatever she has to do to keep his partners with the other companies. Bonita gives her assistants the orders to do a thorough background check on all the CEOs of each company and report back to her as soon as possible. The assistant went to work trying to dig up as much as she could on these companies. It took her half a day to get it all together, and she gave Bonita a full report on the partners. Most of them practice embezzlement, so the FBI cannot find a single lead on them. Benita ponders the information she received. She sent out unknown letters to all the companies threatening to give up all information to the FBI and put them away for life. John was one of the men who received the letter, so he called for his men to find out where the letter came from. John's men attempted to find any possible lead, but their efforts failed because Benita's assistant covered their tracks well. Meanwhile, Jessica had been throwing up and feeling sick for a while now. Jasmine had her suspicions, and she was hoping it wasn't true, but the way things were looking, it seemed so. Jasmine drove Jessica to the hospital to get checked out. The doctor listened to everything Jessica had to say about how she was feeling. He said he would run a few tests to determine what was going on with her. Jessica and Jasmine talked about what James told Jasmine recently while waiting for the doctor to come back with his report. A few hours later, the doctor returned with results. He told Jessica that she is pregnant with twins. She immediately fainted and fell into Jasmine's arms. The doctor called in the staff to check her vitals and make sure she is in good health. Jasmine knew how devastating this was going to be for her. Not only had she been raped, but now she had to live with what happened for 9 months inside of her, and then look at these babies when they arrived. Jasmine did all she could to find ways to say that this wouldn't be so bad. Jessica was not ready for a baby, and now she was having two. Who even knew if the babies had the same father because of the gang rape? She could be one of those rare cases where the woman has twins and they have different daddies, though Jasmine believed Jessica wouldn't tell or explain how she got pregnant. Chapter 6. Jessica thought she was putting on weight, but found out she was 4 months pregnant. Now she knows she has an important decision to make about whether or not she should keep her twins. Jessica wasn't one to contemplate abortion, but she did consider everything that Jasmine was considering when the news hit. Jessica and Jasmine talked about it for some time. They hugged each other affectionately as joyful tears ran down their faces. Jessica decided she would keep the babies and just figure out how to incorporate them in her life. She didn't want them to feel any way about their birth or the situation. She wanted to protect them as much as she could. She was already feeling those maternal instincts kicking in, and she would give them the love that she had in her, all the love she had in her. Something beautiful would come from something so wrong. Dom decided to disguise himself as a customer looking to buy something in his company. With the Bluetooth in his ear, he called Bonita to tell her that he's in the building. Bonita did not answer because she was arguing in the office with John. John wants to buy out Bonita's companies, but she did not want him to own any part of her companies. She knew John would try something like this, and she gladly declined his advances for the companies. She walked towards the door, and John blocks the doorknob. Bonita slaps John across the face and attempts to get out of John's office. John grabs Bonita's neck and began choking her while throwing her around like a rag doll. His hands felt like ice as they closed in a vice-like grip around Bonita's neck. The crazed look in his eyes terrified her as his grip became tighter and tighter and her breath was stopped. She fought back instinctively, terrified about what was on the other side. With her nails digging into his skin, his grip was unyielding. Bonita's lungs began to burn for lack of air. She reached out for his face and felt her nails once again connect with his flesh. Bonita began to see dark spots across her vision as she became more and more frantic. And as she got her fingernails deeper into the skin, he faltered for a moment and stumbled back. Bonita hurried to get up and make her way to the door again. John threw the office chair and tripped Bonita, smacking her face into the side of the desk. She lay there going in and out of consciousness, but still needing to get out of there. All Bonita could think of was, why was he doing this? What had I done? Tears of frustration or pure terror streamed from her eyes as she continued to stare up at John. No one heard the commotion due to the soundproof walls that surrounded Dom's office, but Dom was getting worried, so he thought about causing a distraction in order to find Bonita. Bonita is pinned to the floor by John now. As he continues to choke Bonita, she begins to lose consciousness. There was no escape. There was no way out. She had to get away. She just had to. As each second passed slowly, the panic grew as she tried to force his hands away. She had to breathe. The ache in her chest grew worse by the moment she writhed under his gasp. He could feel her pulse drumming as if she were a frightened rabbit, and the thrill felt good. He laughed manically aloud as Benita choked and sputtered. She was deprived of oxygen for several long, excruciating minutes before her eyelids slowly closed. John didn't release his python-like grip immediately, though, for he knew she was merely unconscious, not dead. Once he felt her heartbeat sputter to a halt, he tossed Wendy aside and drew a deep breath to calm himself before he had to figure out how to dispose of the body. Dom sees his father's men rushing into his office. He tries to find out what's going on, but John is giving orders that all operations in the building be closed down for a few hours. The customers were also ordered to leave the premise until operations are reopened. Dom's anger flared up as he tried to call Benita, but got sent straight to voicemail. He attempted to rush back into the building, but Walla and Andrew knocked out Dom to take him back to the house. John ordered his men to discreetly dump Benita's body in the river. 5 days passed. Dom is still searching and trying to get into contact with Benita. Dom received a call from Benita's assistant telling him that Benita was found in the river. The assistant said that she was found face down, just floating, when a person was out fishing at the park. He began mourning and tears falling down his face. In his heart, he lost a part of himself. They attended Benita's funeral 2 weeks later. Dom tenderly kissed her forehead with tears flowing from his eyes. Benita looked at peace, but Dom was pissed off. How could someone do this to the love of his life? The next day, the detective stopped by Dom's house, not knowing who he was because he was still dressed in a disguise. They began asking him questions about Benita's life, and since they were at the funeral and a close friend of hers, Dom found out about Benita's death, and it was a homicide. They were looking for the killer. Dom cried again while telling the detective information that they wanted to hear. James went to spend the time with Jasmine and told her everything that has happened to him. He left out that John is responsible for everything bad that's been causing problems within the companies. Jasmine told James about Jessica being pregnant with twins. She decided she's going to keep them regardless of who the father is. James smiled. Then, thinking possibly making his own family, took Jasmine into the bedroom to make passionate love to her. Afterwards, they ordered out and watched movies as they cuddled. Jessica was shopping out for groceries and clothes and ran into one of the guys who raped her. The guy walked up to Jessica and kissed her on the lips and smiled, holding her close to his body. He whispered in her ear, letting Jessica know that he would be seeing her much more. Jessica walked away with tears slowly running down her face as she got flashbacks about what happened that night. Jessica became very scared and didn't know if she should tell someone. Dom grabbed 2 handguns from the armory in his basement. He drove one of his cars to the front entrance of his company. He was just about to shoot up everyone in the building when he received a phone call from James telling him not to do it. James had to talk him down by reminding him how hard he worked to get where he was and that they had a plan that would work out. After speaking with James, Dom sat in his car for a moment. He saw someone walking out of the building. It was Benita's assistant, Chloe. She spotted Dom's car and walked to the car to tell him that Benita left her will to her. Dom tells Chloe to get in the car so they can talk. As they are discussing details about business and what happened to be in the will, one thing leads to another and emotions are high. Dom didn't know how to feel about his loss. He was just trying to bury himself in the closest thing to Benita as possible, and Chloe had been that. They got a hotel and had sex. Dom was having trouble dealing with his problems, so Chloe had been there to help him with the grieving process. They escaped the real world and ended up getting a room for 2 weeks. Walla is smoking marijuana and relaxing while watching sports on the TV in his man cave. Walla's wife is in the kitchen cooking dinner for their children. Walla called Dom to tell him they must push back the plans to get the company back for at least a year or more, unless he decides to reveal that he is still alive publicly. Dom thought about his options and decided to go public with revealing himself to his company and letting them know that he is still alive when the time is right. Chapter 7. Rashida, a respiratory therapist that works at one of Benita's hospitals, has seen some of her coworkers stealing supplies from the closet. Something like that could get them fired, but she had other things to do and didn't want to deal with the hassle of reporting it in the paperwork. So she kept it to herself and continued to do her work. Her beautiful smile, curvaceous hips, and fun attitude attracts the attention of a lot of people at work. Sadly, she attracts some of John's men's attention too, and they try to talk to her. She's not interested in a relationship with anyone. She'd just rather focus on her work and pay her bills. It took some time for her to get to this point in her life. When she was younger, she used to get her looks. She used her looks to get things that she wanted until she got into a mess that she couldn't escape. As time went by, she met this man who was wealthy, handsome, and had big plans for her. When they got in a relationship, he spoiled her to death, quite literally. With all the confidence he could have in the world, he was also a jealous man. He always thought she was entertaining other men. Because of her beauty, many men came onto her regardless of her having a significant other. These men were very bold in their attempts, not caring about anything but hoping to have a moment with her. They didn't know that if they got her attention for a second, that was a beating for her when she got home. On one occasion, that happened more and more. Rashida had gotten somewhat used to the beatings, but this time was different. He seemed to be mad about more than someone catching her attention. He beat her almost to death. When her man was finished with her, she ended up in the hospital, unable to fully breathe through her lungs. It was her peak, and Rashida knew she couldn't go back to what she had been doing and who she had been doing. She was almost unrecognizable. Through her recovery, she grew appreciation for nursing and doctor staff that helped her through the pain. Hence, why she became engaged in the medical field. She had finally realized looks don't last forever, and there needs to be more than a nice face. More to her than a nice face. After she recovered, she moved away and didn't look back. It also helped that she didn't have family where she was previously. Her years in the medical field have taught her so much, and she knew she wanted to be a forefront person in being able to help women who may have been in her circumstance or something similar. Her goal was to help any woman in need. Jessica rushes to the hospital that Rashida is at. She's out of breath and gasping for air. Rashida saw her and calls for assistance as she starts to give her oxygen. The nurses and doctors check to make sure Jessica and her twin babies are all right. Jessica and the twin babies are finally doing better than they were before. The doctor wanted Jessica to stay for a few days to be on the safe side. Jasmine called Jessica to find out why she didn't get back to the house yet. Jessica tells her everything that happened. Jasmine and James head to the hospital to see Jessica. But James disguised himself as a different person so John's men would not recognize him. Dom had revealed that he was still alive, but James wanted to keep a low profile with things. He didn't have a concrete plan and wanted to stay a step ahead of the men so he could catch them off guard when the time was right. James called Dom to let him know that he needed to help him fix a problem. Dom made his way over to James, and they took a drive to retrace Jessica's steps. Jessica had taken a picture of the guy who raped her and his friends. They waited to see him and followed him back to his home, where the guy met up with 7 of his friends. Dom and James overhear him telling his friends that he found Jessica and plans on taking advantage of her again. He also mentions that she is pregnant, but that matters none, as well as all they care about is getting a piece of her if they can again. The guys head into the house. They start to drink, play poker, and listen to music. Dom and James pulled out their Desert Eagle guns and attached silencers on them. Dom walks around the backyard while James knocks on the front door with the gun. Some guys grab their guns and aim them at the door. When the door opened, they stared at James, wondering if he was lost. Dom entered the house from the backyard, pointing his gun at him, while James smiled in their faces. One of the guys asked him, "Why are you smiling?" James answered, "Look behind you." James then aimed his gun at them and demanded that they sit down. Dom made them an offer they couldn't refuse. Either they leave Jessica alone and move on with their lives, or they be killed right now. James gave them a warning that should not be taken lightly. They all chose the first option. James made them go to the basement and lock the door behind them. Dom and James got in the car and drove away. One of the guys ended up breaking down the door, and they escaped. Dom and James were feeling good and thought that would be the last they saw of those 2 guys. The guys loaded up with their guns, ski masks, and chloroform and drove to Jessica's neighborhood to wait for her to come home. They knew this would be their only opportunity to kidnap Jessica and take her to an isolated place. One of the guys decided to hire extra men to use as a decoy, just in case things didn't go accordingly. Meanwhile, Rashida told Jessica that it's in her best interest to stay in the hospital because she's not well enough to stay at home due to her respiratory complications. Jessica takes Rashida's word and agrees to stay. On the other hand, Jasmine just got off the phone with James and he told her everything that Dom and he did. Jessica ended up staying at the hospital for several days during that short time. Rashida and her formed a friendship. She was finally cleared to leave the hospital and go home. Jasmine came to pick up Jessica. As they were leaving, they ran into Rashida. Rashida stopped them to let Jessica know that she would go with her so they can get acquainted much better so that she could make sure her health stays where it needs to be. Jasmine agreed and said it was a great idea. This would give Jasmine some help with caring for Jessica as well. They drove separate cars to Jessica's house as they began walking up the steps to the front door. The men were hiding in the bushes waiting for their arrival. Each day that Jessica did not come home, the more the men got tired of waiting. Each day at 5 p.m., they would go wait for Jessica. They just knew she wouldn't be moving around like that since there were twins in her belly. They had almost given up on their mission. The guys tied them up, put them to sleep, and loaded them into a van to send to a cabin isolated in the woods near a lake 8 hours away. Usually, these string of women are tough and let no one take them down easily. However, this day was different. Fear controlled them like nothing else. It kept them quiet and hopeless. When they arrived to the cabin, the sedation was wearing off. "I can't believe this is happening," Jasmine said. As her, Jessica, and Rashida were moving around in the back of the truck, bumping around. "Listen, Jasmine," Rashida said when adjusting herself to sit up in the truck. "We need to be calm and figure something out. I don't know what you guys are in for or have gotten yourself into with these men, but they seem angry." Jasmine sighed. "You're right. Okay, give me a minute to think." Jessica was still sedated and fumbling around while still tied up. Suddenly, Jessica's breathing became heavier. Rashida noticed and knew that she was having a hard time relaxing, which was causing the heavy breathing. Just when she got close to Jessica to try to calm her down, one of the men came to the doors of the back of the truck. Him, being strong, overpowering man that he was, lunged for Rashida because she was the closest and put the bag over her head, then tied the rope around her head. Jasmine was weak and couldn't try to help even a little. Plus, she knew not to fight this man. She'd lose for certain if she did. The only thing she could do was sweat from her armpits, her forehead, and all over her body. The man proceeded to do the same to Jasmine and Jessica. There was silence for what seemed like ages before they were put down and led to a new location for their punishment. Dom and James went to the bar to have a few drinks. James rolled up a blunt and began smoking while watching television. Dom was outside for a minute to make a phone call because it was too loud inside. As he hung up, he heard lots of commotion coming from the bar. He winds up rushing inside to see James fighting with some of the other guys. One of the guys' ladies had approached James, wanting to have a friendly conversation with him. Dom and some of the security guys broke up the fight and told everyone to stop or they will have to leave. The chaos calmed down and things slowly went back to normal. Meanwhile, Jessica, Jasmine, and Rashida are blindfolded in separate rooms in the cabin. Frank, the guy that kissed Jessica on her lips and told his friends to strip the girls and put them in the same room together, he told them that they were going to make the girls watch each other get raped. The guys grabbed Rashida, holding her down and forcing her to give in. Jessica tried to turn her face away. Frank threatened Jessica and told her if she does not look, they're going to put a bullet in Jasmine's head. Tears streamed down Jasmine's face as they started taking turns penetrating Rashida and forcing her to have anal sex. This brought Rashida back. She didn't think she would have to endure such physical and mental pain again, as she did a time ago. Rashida is crying hysterically as she tried to get away. She attempted to put her panties back on when they took a break, but they held her down. They told Sean, another member of the group, to have sex with her, but he refused. They beat him up and decided to give him another chance to do what they say, or they're going to do to him what they're doing to Rashida. He ran out the door and tripped over some branches. Frank ordered the guy to tie the girls back up. Half of the members stayed with the girls while the other half left after Sean. They eventually caught up to Sean and stripped him down while dragging him back to the cabin. Frank told him he brought it upon himself by disobeying. The guys threw Sean on the floor in the room with the girls, giving him one last chance. He still refused. The other guys started to rape Sean until he passed out. The girls cried as they heard Sean moaning and crying in agony. The girls could only think about what might happen next. If they could treat their own member like that, and they definitely didn't give a damn about what happened to them. Jasmine prayed that James and Dom were coming to get them from this hell. God knew they were in need of some serious reinforcement. Jessica was in a state of hysteria as well. With her being pregnant, she couldn't take too much more of what they were going to try to do to them. And it wasn't like they couldn't see that she wasn't pregnant, that she was pregnant. Did they not care to harm that they could harm her seed? They didn't even know which one had impregnated her. How could they be so reckless with her in this state? She knew not to think that they could have some moral compass, but it was in her nature to try and see the best in worst situations. She already vowed not to let her children know about how they came into this world, but this was just horrible. She did not understand what she did to be put in this situation. A little naivety seemed to have gone a long way in this case. Chapter 8. Lately, John and the employees have been questioned by the detectives regarding the murder of Benita. No one had any real answers of what seemed to be false truths. Tyrone, your son is very young, 18, correct? Detective Brown asked. 17, Tyrone said. Ah, yes, right. 17. My. And to think he'd have to spend the rest of his life with you in jail since he's young, but not too young, he may understand the decisions you decided to make here. Detective Brown said, walking around the interrogation table. If only there was a way to cut your sentence in half. Detective Brown grinned, resting his hand on the table and nodding. Oh, I know. And I think you do too, Tyrone. All we need is a confession from you and the two other mongrels that may have helped you. Tyrone looked uncomfortable. I don't know anything. Detective Brown arched his eyebrow. Although this doesn't seem to be true, wouldn't it be better if you only had, let's say, 5 to 10 years in prison instead of 15 to life? Tyrone nodded and side-eyed the door as if someone was listening. And wouldn't you agree that if you don't help us in any way, this could become worse for you and this company, as your ringleader is now in charge of it? We know John must have had something to do with this. There's too much of a coincidence. Tyrone jumped out of his chair, face tense. I don't know a damn thing. You can't make me talk where there's nothing to talk about, he said with an intense fierceness in his voice. Well, Detective Brown thought for a moment. You said that you're not going to talk, but you could write it down for me. Tyrone fidgeted in his chair, releasing a big breath, because he couldn't really afford to be in any trouble when things go down the sink. Look, he finally said, I'm not going to give you all the details, but I'm going to give you what you need. He glanced at the officer standing in the corner like he knew he was about to snitch big time. After speaking with Tyrone, he called in the next man, Kenneth. Tyrone had given quite a bit of information, but he needed to see if he could get another man to explain the situation similarly. Kenneth broke down too. It always worked when you use people's family against them and what could be taken away. Kenneth sang like a canary at the thought of anything happening to his wife and little baby girl and not being there for them. After Detective Brown's questions and statements, Kenneth paused, nodded, and then started to speak. All I can say is that John is the one who made the order to dump her body. Beforehand, we did not see what went down. One moment we see John and Benita going into his office, and the next we only see he came out into the lobby area. What did he say? Detective Brown asked, in hopes of more information. Nothing. He just told us to get back to work and then called me and Tyrone over to carry out the order to clean up his office. Benita was not in sight. What if I told you that John killed Benita with his bare hands and someone dumped her body like she was a worthless animal? I'd say that was crazy. I don't understand why he would even kill her. She was the one with more body than brains. Oh, I'm not lying. Detective Brown held his hands up as if under arrest. I'm also not lying when I say the victim was a very smart woman. By no means should she have been murdered, but you underestimate her talents. No way. Kenneth was in disbelief. Yes, Detective Brown confirmed. You've been giving me plenty of information to continue our investigation. Way. Thanks. Detective Brown escorted Kenneth out of the room. His last suspect was the culprit himself. He needed John to make a confession, which would make it so his men didn't have to testify against him in court. John walks in the room, all cool and smooth. Before he could even plop down in a chair, Detective Brown got right to the point. There's no use in denying your involvement now, Detective Brown said. Let us be done with this already. Tell the whole truth and nothing but. John sat there calmly. We're waiting, John, Detective Brown said. John's lawyers come in. Michael Smith and tells the detectives that he would like a few moments with his client in privacy. Michael knows that John is the person who killed Benita, and he's not the only one that knows either. He told John that by law he has to report it, but whispered in John's ear, letting him know that he will make sure this goes away. John gave Michael a vicious stare, signaling that he better get this problem taken care of, or his family will be in great danger. John calls his right-hand man and told him to have some of their men keep tabs on Michael's family. Detective Brown let Michael know that John is their main suspect and that he should not think about leaving town anytime soon. Michael sent out his private investigator, Catherine Thomas, to find out why the police think John is guilty. Catherine went to the location where Benita's body was found to see if she can find any other evidence. She reported back to Michael, telling him that she hasn't found anything yet, but she's calling one of their partners to help her search. Michael let her know how important it is to find out this information as soon as possible. Michael's wife, Maria, called Michael, telling him that she felt like there were people following her and their 2 children everywhere they went. Michael assured her that she probably was overwhelmed from work and taking care of the kids. He called John and began talking about what he's going to do to make this problem disappear. Suddenly, Michael began gasping for air while on the phone with John still. John chuckled and said, "If you die before I'm in the clear with Detective Brown, your family will be joining you in the grave alongside your casket." Still gasping for air, Michael replied, "That will not be necessary for you to do. I'll make sure you get off by any means necessary." John hung up on Michael and went back to planning on how he'll take over Dom's company. Dom and Chloe went into the movies and then out to eat afterwards. Chloe urged Dom to go through his plan soon before it's too late to take back control of his company. He told her the company will be back in his control soon. After things get back to running smoothly, he will give full control to James. Chloe supports the decision to let James run the company. Dom ended the night by making love to Chloe at her house. On the other hand, James had been calling Jasmine constantly, trying to figure out why she hasn't been answering the phone. He got upset and began to interrogate all the other guys on the corner about where Frank lives. He asked them if they have seen Frank recently, and that it's in their best interest to tell him the truth. A guy named Chris told James that he saw everything that happened when Frank and his friends came out the door with guns looking for someone. Next, he saw them get into some cars and drive off. Chris said it seemed like they knew the location of their target. James left his number with Chris so he can keep him updated to find out anything else. Soon after, James received a message that was not pleasant to watch at all. It made his stomach turn because the lengths that they were willing to go through, not just with this woman, Jasmine, but Jessica, and she's months pregnant. Frank sent a live stream of Jasmine, Jessica, and Rashida to James' phone, demanding $200 million ransom for each of them. James sent the video to Dom. Dom was pissed off because James was like a brother, which meant Jasmine was like a sister. They discussed it for a few hours. He agreed to pay, but still have a backup plan if things went wrong. Dom saw the video, and he could tell that they had been beaten and sexually abused. James called Walla and Andrew, explaining the situation to them. Dom told Andrew to withdraw the money from the bank. Chapter 9. Detective Brown arrested John for the murder of Benita and was taken into custody. He was very angry and began demanding for his one phone call immediately. Detective Brown informed Michael that John was taken into prison and will be charged with first-degree murder. Michael began to worry because his wife wasn't answering the phone and his calls were going straight to voicemail. He started panicking and thinking of what John had told him if he didn't get him free of the charges placed on him. John gave Michael one last chance to get him out of this case before his family was executed. Michael received the information from Catherine and told her to destroy all the evidence they have on him while he bails John out of jail. Dom and James met Frank and his friends at the location with the ransom money for Jasmine, Jessica, and Rashida. Frank told one of his friends to take off their blindfolds so they can see them. Jasmine and the rest of the girls were happy to see James and Dom. They proceeded with exchanging the money for the girls. Jessica and the girls ran over to Dom and stood behind him crying. James began walking away towards Dom, but Frank and his friends pulled out their guns and aimed them at James. Dom smiled, and suddenly Walla and Andrew come in with guns behind Frank and his friends. It was a standoff between the men to see who was tougher. In reality, Dom and James knew what it was, and they had no fears that they would make it out alive. James pulled the gun out and forced it into Frank's mouth. He says to Frank, "You should have taken the money and disappeared. All of you should have listened when Dom told you this was your warning." Frank tried to beg for his life, but Dom and the rest of the guys began executing them. For James and Dom, it was always so familiar when it was time to take a life. They didn't enjoy it, but they didn't necessarily hate it either. Each one of them felt the same chills running down their spines, though they weren't caused by a sinister act they were about to perform. Though not blood brothers, one could say that they were when it came to this. Darkness lurked behind each of their eyes, and murder hung in the air like a thick fog, creeping up into the city until it finally engulfed it completely. Dom pulled the first trigger, and James followed suit. Dom's hand shook with excitement as he raised the gun, his expression that similar of a madman's. Each murder committed, every second of their deaths was savored until the moment of their last breaths. They never failed to finish a job, though by ensuring each person was dead before they left the scene this time. No warnings, just promises kept. The girls screamed because they weren't used to seeing people killed in front of them. They were about to execute Sean, but the girls intervened and explained to James and Dom that Sean tried to stop the others from raping them. Dom let them go, but 3 weeks later, Sean was killed in a car accident. At Sean's funeral, Dom went to this company. After Sean's funeral, Dom went to his company with James, letting everyone know that he was still alive and still in charge. John was getting paranoid because he didn't know if James told Dom that he was responsible for everything that went wrong in the company. Dom told everyone that he is caught up with everything going on in the company and will address it as soon as he talks to the FBI and police. FBI agents in the police department showed up to interrogate Dom and James. After answering questions, Dom and James straightened out all of the worries and problems that had been going on. John told his men to stop embezzlement of the company funds until further notice. They were told to continue doing everything they are told until he has a talk with Dom and James. Dom, James, and John are in the office, ready to have a conversation. Dom told both James and John he has been doing a lot of thinking about everything that has happened to him. He knows who's responsible for everything bad, and he knows what has happened in the company. Dom demands an answer as to why he was willing to have his own son killed just to gain power over his company. Why did he kill Benita, the woman he loved, and planned on asking her to marry him? They sat there waiting for John to explain himself. John pulled his gun out and told Dom and James to put their guns on the floor and slowly sit down in the chairs. John explained to them that they lacked vision and requirements needed to run the company in order to make it an unstoppable empire. John gave them 3 options. The first option, they turn over the company and power to him. The second option, they allow him to buy them out, and everyone walks away unharmed. The last option is killing both of them here and making sure they're dead this time. He will make sure their bodies disappear without a trace. James replied, "This is a no-brainer. I plan on killing you anyways." James rushed to John as they began tussling with the gun. 1 minute, James was over John's head with his knee squishing his throat, hoping to prevent him from breathing long enough to get control of the gun. Then the next was John, able to get on top of James with his hands around his neck, trying to do the same as James had intended to do. A shot was fired, and it hit Dom on his shoulder. Dom crouches down and crawls for cover behind his desk. James and John continue to fight in Dom's office as the gun is knocked out of John's hand as it fell near the desk. Dom eyes it, trying to see if he should go for it or let James get his hands on it. James and John go through the door while fighting and rolling down the stairs. Once they find an opening, employees begin pulling them apart. John tried to brush it off, but his anger had already gotten the best of him. He was pulling away from the employees, trying to get another hit at James. But 3 of them had to hold him back. Things were getting out of hand in front of people who should know nothing of the power struggle between Dom, John, and James. The employees calmed John down and told him that this is not the time or place for this. When Chloe passed by, she knew Dom had to be somewhere near. She went into Dom's office and saw that there was blood on the floor. She called for a doctor and a nurse to come help him. They demanded that they keep this incident on the low, as they wanted to make the public think everything was handled, despite the surprising news of Dom still being alive. John didn't want the public thinking there were any cracks in his leadership. Chapter 10. At the hospital, they were in a frenzy. Everyone seemed to be super busy. It took Dom 3 nurses before one actually got his information to check him into the ER. Eventually, the doctor and the nurses got the bullets out of Dom's shoulder. They explained to him that he would have to do physical therapy in order for his shoulder to get better. Fortunately for him, he did not need intense surgery to fix the injury. With all the tissue and ligaments in the shoulder, he was lucky for the bullet to have stopped instead of going all the way through. The only problem was what it did nick a couple of nerves, and that was what the physical therapy was for, to make sure the nerves still function properly. Dom doesn't agree with the decision, but he agreed to do it for the next few months, along with the physical therapy. Dom was on a concoction of antibiotics to help with the lasting pain, to keep the infection from happening while in recovery. They had him doing intense workouts for his shoulder to get him ready as possible. Since Dom wanted to cut the 6-month program into a 3-month program, he was in a lot of pain, but he wanted to be strong again and deal with it. He was making great progress, and Chloe has been supporting him through his rehab, as well as trying to keep the peace at the job between James and John until Dom is finished recovering. Chloe knew if any more physical harm is done to Dom's shoulder, he might lose his entire arm, depending on how his current nerve heals. Back at the job, James and John are constantly at each other's throat, trying to kill one another. The employees keep them separated and make sure there's enough security between the two of them. James goes home to Jasmine, Jessica, and Rashida as they begin their therapy sessions. The girls don't feel safe anymore and want James or Dom to drive them to and from the therapist's office every time. Jasmine and Rashida returned to their jobs after taking leave of absence. They were fortunate enough to receive paid time off from their employer, and they were glad to have one another through such a traumatic experience. During these last few months, they had grown close and wanted to care for Jessica in her predicament and also trying to heal. As Dom's last month of physical therapy comes close, he is told that he has made a miraculous recovery with the work that they have put in their sessions. Afterwards, he would always go home and do some of the same workouts he had done in therapy. Jessica is in labor at the hospital, patiently waiting for the arrival of her twins. She started having contractions in her 36-week checkup and several days later went into full labor with the babies. With the stress of everything going on, Jessica already felt like she wasn't going to be able to make it into full term with the babies anyways. To prepare for the day, aside from the trauma, she had been exercising, doing workouts that were appropriate for every stage of her pregnancy. Not only did it help her cope with her situation and peace of mind working out gave her, but also she was more in tune with her body. So when she got in the delivery room, Jessica's labor went smoothly and she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl and a boy naturally. She woke up the next day to see the nurses bringing her 2 babies. Jessica held them and began to cry tears of joy. Dom had come there to be there for her in the morning. His heart went out to her for going through so much in so little time. He knew she was a strong woman and admired that about her. She didn't choose to let the negative affect her decision on having these babies or how she proceeded with her pregnancy. She could have made a different decision, but she didn't. Jessica was smiling from ear to ear as Dom asked the nurse to take a picture of the 3 of them. After several months of holding them hostage, John told the men to release Michael's wife and children and drop them off at their house. Michael ran up to Maria and his children, hugging them tightly with feelings of relief. Maria slapped Michael in the face while crying. She couldn't believe that they were held in a room for months without knowing where Michael was or what had even happened to him. They went into the house, and Maria told Michael she is leaving him and taking the children with her. He got on his knees and began begging Maria, asking her not to leave. He had never begged so much in his life. He knew deep down why she was doing this, but he couldn't really believe it was happening. He couldn't do anything for his family, hence the reason he hadn't done right by his job. She explained to him that she cannot take any more secrets and lies in their marriage. If he had filled her in on what he was doing, maybe things could have been different for them. But instead, she blames Michael for putting their children in a situation they shouldn't have been in. They shouldn't have been a part of. She was disgusted with him. Michael called Catherine, explaining to her why Maria is leaving him, but he refused to let her and the children go. Catherine tried to reason with Michael and calm him down, explaining to him that this is the kind of situation that could get out of hand. If he does something illegal, he could lose everything. He was not hearing what she was saying. All he could see was red, and he was ready to handle the situation. Michael told Catherine he would call her back and hung up the phone. He grabbed his gun out of his desk, went outside to his car, and drove off in a hurry. Dom, James, and Chloe and John planned to have all the employees meet for important announcements pertaining to the future company. Just as Dom began speaking to the employees, Michael walked into the meeting with the employees and opened fire on John 5 times. One of those slow motion action films. No one saw this coming. All the employees grabbed Michael and snatched the gun away before he could do any harm. James seemed to be full of joy watching the blood pour out of John's body. John looks like he's in critical condition, but James doesn't care because he earned it after everything he's done. The ambulance and the police were called and rushed John to the hospital. Dom shakes his head in disappointment, not knowing how to feel about his father's condition. Even though John put him through a lot of crap, he still loves his father at the end of the day. Chloe tried to comfort Dom, but he was in his office and waited to be questioned by the police. Michael was arrested and placed in a cell and wouldn't be able to get out until Monday when he will be able to be seen by a judge. Maria overheard the news that Michael was arrested for shooting one of his clients. She thought to herself maybe John was the reason for her and her kids being kidnapped. She thought about her decision on leaving him. She almost wanted to change her mind, but she thought better of it. She still knew that if her husband had confided in her and not lied, things could have gone differently. Dom and the company decided to make a visit to the hospital. When they arrived, the doctor told him that John is in a coma and they aren't sure if he will come out of it. Maria went to visit Michael the next day. Michael confessed everything to Maria from the past and the present in detail. She began to cry as tears streamed down her cheeks. After finding out all these secrets Michael has kept from her, she blamed him for the problems and pain he caused to this family, especially their children. Dom thanked the doctor for saving his father's life, but Dom couldn't stop thinking about all of the bad things he has done, from killing Bonita to trying to destroy everything he has accomplished. He began to pray, asking God to give him the strength to forgive his father. James observed Dom and noticed that he's in a bad mood and looking at his facial expressions. He waits for Dom to finish praying, and then it explains that he would be there for him no matter what. Dom went home with Chloe, leaving John unharmed, and decided to drink the night away. The next morning, they saw on the news that John had been murdered at the hospital. Apparently, a woman disguised as a nurse slit his throat and injected John with some poison. The culprit is still at large, and the police are now investigating the murder of John Johnson, the notorious crime boss. Dom's devastation of losing his father began to rub off on everyone at the company. Chloe and James tried to get him to stay home for a few weeks, but he refused. Instead, he explained to Chloe and James that he had to keep busy in order to move forward. James went home for his break and spent some quality time with Jasmine. Jasmine told James that their therapy sessions are working out great. Jessica brought the twins over to see James and Jasmine for a few weeks. Rashida called Jessica and Jasmine from time to time to see how everything was doing. All of them have returned back to work and continued on with their lives. Through all that had happened, they came out stronger than they were. Dom had a meeting with Chloe, James, and everyone that he treats as family. He told them when things get back to normal to stay on edge because more trouble is headed for them. James thinks they have new enemies that are slowly revealing themselves. Chloe suggests that they all take necessary precautions to stay safe, and everyone should be responsible for the next person. When everyone is about to leave, they receive a calling card threatening them from their new enemies. Suddenly, a bullet was shot through the window, causing the shattered glass to fly everywhere and just miss Chloe. This was the beginning of what was to be expected when you become a powerful businessman, now especially since John was dead. Chasing Purpose, written by Deron Lee.